Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? Well, it is early fall. It is finally getting cold. There's that crisp air going on, and so I put on one of my hats. I dig one of them out of the drawer, but I just shaved my head. These are the struggles that I go through. That I think I should share with you. So I'm bald. I'm shaving my head, and when you put a hat on right then, there's nothing for the hat to hold on to. So this thing's probably gonna start riding up on my head. And after about 12, 16 hours, then enough hair growth happens that it kind of like Velcro or a little sandpaper that holds the hat in place. You probably don't want to know these things, but these are the struggles, the big struggles of my life. Anyhow, let's talk about the actual subject of this video. I'm involved, as I've been talking about in this group, where we're just talking about various RPG techniques and ideas and what have you. And one of the members is Murder Bunny, and she brought up this great topic of, I guess, historical accuracy or verisimilitude or historicity as a game master. Like when you're setting something at a particular time, how accurate do you want to get? And she was using the context of running Leagues of Gothic Horror, which is 1890s, it's Victorian era England. Leagues of Adventure itself is built as kind of like steam pulp, or a little steampunk, steam pulp. Role playing. Gothic horror introduces the horror element, and so she's talking about how accurate do you want to get in terms of how people act, what their attitudes were, how fast does a train really go, what does travel really like in that era, all the little bits and pieces that make the Victorian era so much different than this era, and what do you want to focus on, what do you want to kind of hand wave. And we also kind of went down that rabbit hole in the comments as we're discussing about this, where she's saying, well, somebody dumps a body in the Thames River, and all of a sudden she's figuring out, well, how fast does this river really flow? How fast would it take this body to sink? Etc. And I think we've all, or a lot of us, have gone down that realism or verisimilitude rabbit hole in role-playing games and tried to figure out exactly where do we want to fit. With that, she actually brought this great article about a couple of Borgia series on the Borgias, and I forget who, I think it was HBO and somebody else actually did them, and how each one of them was historically inaccurate in some areas and historically accurate in others, and the feel of those two particular shows ended up being very different. And so that's really what I wanted to talk about, because it's not just about historical accuracy. I think that, regardless of what it is, we focus on various things in our role-playing game experience. As game masters, as players, as a collaborative group, we decide we're going to focus on these particular elements. And I want to look at just like some of those areas we focus on, like why we might focus on them, and then the end result is they have a profound, or can have a profound impact on what the role-playing game experience ends up being like. And so this is not going to be a definitive video. I'm just going to talk about a few different areas, mostly just ask questions, and hopefully, get some of your answers. I'll probably divulge some of my preferences, and some of them probably won't surprise you if you watch this channel long enough. But right off the bat, I'll start with what she was talking about, like historical accuracy. How much do you want to focus on, and on what parts? Right now I'm running a couple of Lamentations of the Flame Princess games. They're both in 1620. There are a lot of things in there that I'm trying to get some level of historical accuracy, like when did this battle really happen, where, sometimes it's just geographical accuracy, which I've messed up a couple times, like, how close are these two major cities to each other, how long would it really take to travel in that time period, and other things, I'm not focusing on as much, the real details of, like, what's the turnip growing season, or, it turns out it's rather entertaining. It's just something I wanted to have happen. I felt that my constables should be taking notes, so all of a sudden the constables are carrying around some kind of paper and pad and something that might pass as a pencil. I'm sure they didn't have anything like that in the era, but that was something that I really didn't, I didn't feel the need to be historically accurate at that particular point. It kind of ruined a bit of the feel, at that exact moment that I wanted to have this constable taking notes. And then next thing would be like realism. What are you focusing on? Why are you focusing on a particular area of realism? And I've talked about this ad nauseum. As a kid, I started playing D&D. It's very, very abstract. The early versions of D&D, and I think they're all abstract. But then we started getting all these various articles coming out, like how much does a giant weigh? How much does how many coins really fit in this sack? Yada yada yada. We're getting into more of this verisimilitude, more of this realism, and so what kind of realism do you want to focus on in your game, and what kind of stuff do you want to sort of hand wave, and why? That can really profoundly affect the way the game feels. One of the things, I keep on sounding like a shill for this game all the time, but in Lamentations of the Flame Princess, I remember looking at that encumbrance system, and it is very, very, it's not very granular at all. The camera is panned way out, or zoomed way out. And it's just, each item is another point of encumbrance. Maybe an oversized item is just one slot. That's great. The original system that I grew up with of encumbrance was much more finely detailed. We're looking at weights and everything, and I found the other one much more usable. I didn't care that much, exactly how many pounds this guy was carrying. But that was me, and there was a reason for that. I wanted to be, I wanted to take encumbrance into account, or what people were carrying into account, but I didn't want to get bogged down and play accountant. You may like that. There's nothing wrong with that. As far as like focusing now, like on task resolution, like how granular do you really want that to be? I made this a few videos about that. One of the videos I think was called Weevils in the Flower, and I also looked at like time compression in that video. But how much do you want to focus? How much do you want to zoom in on task resolution? Do you want a system where you're really resolving every little thing? Do you want something like, I guess, like say like Mythras or RuneQuest, or something like GURPS, where you're looking more at like GURPS would probably be more of the realism aspect, but where you're resolving every little single action in a particular, it could be a combat, it could be a social interaction, it could be whatever. It could be that time that my wizard years ago in another Lamentations game, where every 10 minutes I'm making a die roll to see how much of a bushcraft roll I'm getting, and I'm doing extended roll is what I was doing. Or do I want to just zoom way out and do one die roll to resolve a whole bunch of stuff? In the case of my wizard outside, just one success fail die roll. Or there's some games where you roll dice, and it could give you some advantages or disadvantages or positive or negative effects, or just a simple success or failure, but you narrate this entire scene and all the elements within that scene at that point. And, that's a panned way or zoomed way out. Or do you want to zoom somewhere in the middle and resolve some events? How granular that focus you want to get will have a profound impact in terms of how the game feels. But the other question is like, why do you want to zoom in so close, or why do you want to zoom way back? What are your intentions for that? What do you want to gloss over in those things in terms of task resolution? Or do you want to gloss over things that are just simply too boring? That could be time compression or task resolution. We really don't care, how if we know he's going to fix this wagon. We really don't care. That's kind of a boring part. Let's get to the cool part of this session. Or do we want to gloss over a chance of failure, because that's really going to be something that might, it would suck if he failed at something that was really mundane. You might be in the camp. It would really suck if my character died, or really, had this misfortune in this really boring part of the adventure. I want all the, something like that to happen in the cooler part. Then looking at like, what do the mechanics that you choose to use, whether it's the game system or whatever you're actually choosing to really enforce in your game, in games that have multiple mechanics. What do those mechanics focus on, and what gets glossed over, why? And let's see, what activities do you spend your game time focusing on? And this could be like separate from the mechanics, but like, what are you actually doing in your game session, and why? I mean, do you want to be playing a Conan the Barbarian type game where you're buying tea and crumpets in the marketplace, or do you just want to get to the part you're just going to focus on the activities where you're fighting the snake men? Are you focusing on everything, or are you glossing over some stuff? What part of the characters' lives, or what parts of the world, are you just hand-waving or ignoring? And why are you doing that? Or why are you choosing to focus on those things, And then, ultimately, I think a lot of this, starts to boil down to what kind of genre are you trying to create? Or, are you trying to create a real authentic genre? I'm not saying inauthentic is wrong. Are you trying to create the most authentic, Gothic, Victorian England you possibly can? Or are you trying to recreate a genre that you've seen on TV or in films, or that you've read in a book and kind of like, imagined in your head, that may not be quite so historically accurate, maybe way different, But like, what genre are you trying to recreate at that particular point, So that kind of determines what you focus on. Then you think to yourself, like, what are the essential elements of that genre? What actively detracts from that genre? If you focus on particular elements, are there things that really just, completely derail it? And what are some things that are just kind of inconsequential? They're elements of this particular genre, but once again, this aspect of Victorian England, or this aspect of Blade Runner, or if you're trying to recreate some kind of what's the word for that? Some kind of dystopian or cyberpunk, for lack of a better word, feel. Other things that you're just like, yeah, we're not going to focus on that because it's uninteresting, or it'll completely derail the feel. And then, the things that, I started to notice, for myself, and then I'll kind of get back to this list a little bit, is, like a lot of times I'll talk about liking a rules light system, and there's a variety of reasons for like why I don't like a heck of a lot of rules. I do like to have a lot of system mastery, but there's times I've discovered that I really kind of get into how the game feels, what the theme really is. Maybe it's not the theme, but it's just the kind of the overall feeling. And so, for me, like in many cases, I don't like a high level of granularity. Now, sometimes it could be things that I just find completely uninteresting. I'm not a history buff. It's something that I struggle with actually implementing in the game. There are parts, as I'm reading a setting or reading about a particular time period or whatever, if I'm really kind of reading up on a genre or a feel, there are parts that just put me to sleep. To be quite honest with you, there's some parts of my eyes glaze over, but I'm just like, you know what? In terms of playing a game where I want to recreate this feel, or get the feel I got from reading that book, or watching this film, or thinking about whatever like a scenario in this time period or this genre, there are aspects of that I'm like, oh, it's completely boring. I really don't care what the people are wearing, or some part of the political intrigue, or whatever. You get the idea. So yeah, at the end of the day, though, I mean, what you choose to focus on can really have a huge impact on what the theme of the game is, what the mood or the feel of the game is, what your takeaway reactions are. It'll have an impact on the verisimilitude. One of the things I really like, what are the consequences? Sometimes I choose to focus on things. I choose to zoom the camera in and become much more focused and much more granular when something becomes rather interesting. I'm running the game very recently, and there's a lot of things I'm just hand waving. I really don't care how long it takes. We kind of figure out, okay, it's going to take you about a day to get here. In terms of, I'm doing lots of weights and measures, hand waving, where it's like, oh, okay, this is approximate. But then one of the characters decides they're going to use a spell and they're going to create a cubic foot of silver. I instantly stopped and I'm thinking, I wonder how massive that is and how much that weighs. And the reason I stopped and looked it up on my phone on the internet was because this could have interesting consequences. And so I chose at that particular point to zoom the camera in, and get much more granular, because this could be really interesting. This could have a really kind of cool effect. At that moment, that was no longer minutia to me. That became incredibly engaging. And as it turned out, it weighed 655 pounds, which was quite a bummer for the people involved. There's other things, though, like I kind of mentioned, like are you choosing to focus on things like intrigue or politics? Is that floating your boat? Are you choosing to focus a lot on the success-failure paradigm? Is that when the game really gets interesting for you? Are you choosing to focus on catharsis? Whatever it happens to be. That will inform like what you focus on, which in turn will kind of inform like what the game actually ends up feeling like. And one of the other thing, and then I'll quit babbling at this point because I'm getting to the point where I'm going to start to babble. As all these themes, as all these like the final emergent like or feel or genre or whatever you want to call it of the game kind of shows up based on all these focus things. Is that something you planned? Did you plan to finally get to this particular feel, this particular theme, this particular catharsis, or was it emergent? There were parts recently in some of my game playing where it was just plain old emergent. When Philippe watches Jean-Marie in our All for One game, kill the 16-year-old boy that is the werewolf who does not fight back. When he runs in and he very quickly assaults and kills the cultist in the mansion. When he is unable to intimidate the Cardinals guards. He kind of intimidated them, but they were kind of honor bound to stay there and fight him. People that he knew he could just trounce, and he ended up having to trounce them. What were the effects on Philippe? These effects were not something I planned, and I don't think anybody else planned. But at the end of the game, I kind of walked away a little bit more of a, I don't know if it's catharsis or what it really would be, but there was a feeling that in some ways that character is changed and his outlook on life is a little bit changed. Those were emergent themes and feelings and whatnot from that game session that I don't think were necessarily planned, but they were informed on like what we chose to focus on. So yeah, I'd like to get your thoughts on this because it's a huge topic, and I feel like I'm only scratching the surface.